The sky over Sydney burned crimson as massive shadows blotted out the sun. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood on the roof of Royal North Shore Hospital, watching the Verith ships descend through the atmosphere like predatory birds. The alien vessels were colossal, organic-looking structures that pulsed with bioluminescent veins of sickly green light. Around her, sirens wailed in a symphony of human despair. She'd been in neuroscience for 23 years, studying consciousness, neural networks, the secrets locked within human brains. Nothing had prepared her for this moment. The ship's weapons began their work, and the city erupted in chaos. Buildings crumbled, streets fractured, people screamed and ran in all directions, a tide of panic flowing through Sydney's streets like blood through wounded veins. Sarah's phone buzzed. Her son, James, only 16, sending a message from their home in Parramatta. "Mom, where are you? I'm scared," she typed back with trembling fingers, words that rang hollow even as she wrote them. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'm coming home." But she wasn't coming home. None of them were. Within 48 hours, the Verith had established control. Their technology was incomprehensibly advanced. They could disable any electronic device, disable vehicles, shut down power grids with pulses of invisible energy. Humanity's greatest inventions became useless metal and plastic. The aliens themselves were terrifying to behold. Towering, crystalline beings with too many joints, their bodies reflecting light in impossible angles. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, empty voids that seemed to swallow hope itself. The governments fell. The military surrendered. Resistance crumbled like paper in fire. Within a week, the Verith had divided humanity into camps across every major city on Earth. Sydney's survivors were herded into massive detention zones in Parramatta, Western Sydney, and along the sprawling industrial areas. Sarah found James within 3 days, pulling him into her arms at the processing center, tears streaming down her face as Verith guards, tall, silent, mechanical in their efficiency, cataloged every human they could find. "What do they want?" James whispered, his young face pale with fear. Sarah had no answer. The Verith didn't communicate. They simply enslaved. They set humanity to work, mining rare minerals, constructing their bases, maintaining their ships. The work was backbreaking, the conditions inhuman. People died by the dozens each day. Sarah watched colleagues from the hospital system perish from exhaustion, malnutrition, and despair. She watched mothers cry as their children were separated into different work camps. She watched the light fade from human eyes, replaced by a hollow resignation that was almost worse than the fear. But somewhere in her scientist's mind, Sarah began to notice something. When she worked alongside others, when the fatigue and pain became almost unbearable, something strange would happen. She'd think of James's face, and suddenly she'd feel another worker's presence in her mind. Not words, not images, but a connection, a shared awareness, a sense of not being alone in the darkness. It started with small moments. A woman named Elena would catch her eye across the mining site, and Sarah would feel a surge of strength that had nothing to do with her body. A man named David would brush past her, and suddenly her despair would lighten, replaced by something almost like hope. At night, in the crowded detention barracks, Sarah noticed something impossible. When people slept in proximity, their breathing would synchronize. When they suffered together, their pain seemed somehow shared and therefore lighter. She began to study it in secret, using the limited resources available to her. She'd been a neuroscientist. She understood the human brain's capacity for empathy, for connection, for synchronized neural activity. But this was different. This was deeper. This was a biological imperative awakening in response to oppression, to shared trauma, to the primal human need to survive together. The Varath had no idea what they'd awakened. They didn't understand human consciousness the way Sarah did. They didn't understand that humans had evolved for cooperation, for group consciousness, for collective survival. And they certainly didn't understand that when pushed to the edge of extinction, humanity's greatest strength would finally emerge from the darkness. 3 months into the occupation, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. It happened in the mining tunnels beneath the Blue Mountains, where they'd been forced to excavate the rare mineral the Varath called stellite, a crystalline substance that powered their technology. She'd been working alongside a group of 40 humans when a tunnel collapse occurred. Rocks fell with thunderous roars. A man, Marcus, an electrician from Parramatta, was trapped under debris, his leg crushed. The Varath guards simply stood there, watching with those empty void eyes, making no move to help. To them, humans were expendable resources. One damaged unit meant nothing. But Marcus's screams triggered something in the other workers. Sarah felt it ripple through the group like electricity. It started as emotion, grief, anger, desperate need. But it became something more. She felt the consciousness of every person in that tunnel linked together. A neural network of living minds, unified by purpose. Without speaking, without coordinating, they moved as one organism. 10 people lifted the rocks simultaneously, their strength amplified by something transcendent. Another group caught Marcus as he fell, cradled him, protected him. Within seconds, the impossible had been accomplished. The Varath guards activated their weapons, preparing to execute the humans for what they perceived as rebellion. But something extraordinary happened. The unified consciousness of the group created a barrier, not physical, but energetic. The guards' weapons misfired. The neural pulses they'd been using to control human workers bounced back, disorienting them. In that moment of chaos, Sarah understood. Humanity wasn't just connecting emotionally. They were creating a shared consciousness field that interfered with the Varath's technology. The aliens relied on neural manipulators implanted in human brainstems to control them, to suppress their will. But when humans unified their consciousness, when they synchronized their brainwaves into a collective frequency, they could override those implants. They could fight back. That night, Sarah gathered a small group in the barracks. Marcus, who survived, carried on makeshift stretchers. Elena, David, and 8 others she'd observed showing the strongest connection potential. She spoke carefully, quietly, knowing that informants existed, even among the enslaved. "We can fight," she said simply, "not with weapons, with ourselves, with what we are as a species." She explained her theory, the neural synchronization, the amplified consciousness, the demonstrated ability to interfere with Varath technology. She told them about humans' evolutionary history as group hunters, as tribal beings whose strength came from unity. She explained that desperation wasn't weakness, it was a catalyst. "But we need to be careful," she continued. "We can't do this with violence. The Varath are too strong physically, too advanced technologically. But if we can perfect the synchronization, If we can create a larger unified consciousness network, we might be able to predict their movements, anticipate their actions, defend ourselves and others. David, a former military officer, leaned forward. You're talking about a psychic network, a hive mind. No, Sarah corrected. We're not losing individuality. We're enhancing connection. Think of it like individual instruments in an orchestra. We stay ourselves, but when we play together, we create something greater. Over the following weeks, Sarah began training small groups in meditation, in consciousness synchronization, in the mental discipline required to maintain individual identity while contributing to the collective awareness. It was exhausting work, almost as demanding as the physical labor. But slowly, something began to shift in the camps. People reported feeling less alone. The suicides declined. Hope, that most fragile of human emotions, began to return. And more importantly, the workers began to predict Varath movements before they happened. When guards would arrive to relocate workers, the humans already knew. When new orders came through, the collective consciousness sensed them before they were announced. It was as though humanity was developing a kind of precognition, powered not by magic, but by the most advanced biological system in the known universe, the human brain working in perfect synchronization. The Varath noticed the increased efficiency, the reduced escape attempts, the strange compliance. Their commanders interpreted it as resignation, as humans finally accepting their fate. They had no framework for understanding consciousness as a weapon. They had no concept of human resilience manifesting as something transcendent. Sarah knew they were running out of time. The Varath would eventually understand what was happening. But until then, humanity had a precious window. A moment to grow stronger. A moment to prepare. And James, working now in the same facility as his mother, felt his consciousness link with hers for the first time. In that connection, he understood everything she'd been planning. He understood that humanity was about to stand up. By month 6 of the occupation, the Unified Consciousness Network had grown exponentially. What started as small groups synchronizing in secret had expanded across the detention camps, spreading like wildfire through whispered conversations, through touch, through the simple act of sleeping in proximity to others who understood. Sarah had established a secret leadership council. Marcus, now fully healed and serving as tactical coordinator. Elena, who'd become an expert at teaching new members how to synchronize their consciousness. David, managing logistics and safety. And a dozen others representing different camps across Sydney, Newcastle, and Wollongong. They communicated through the consciousness network itself. No words needed, just shared awareness, instant coordination. The Varath occupation force had grown complacent, with no traditional military resistance, no coordinated attacks. They'd reduced their security measures. They didn't understand that humanity had learned to see through their eyes, to sense their movements through the unified field of human consciousness. The first real test came when the Varath attempted to relocate 50,000 humans from the western Sydney camps to labor in deep ocean mining operations. The Consciousness Network detected the order before it was even fully formulated in the Varath command hierarchy. Through the network, Sarah and her council coordinated a response that was breathtaking in its subtlety. When the Varath transports arrived, they found the camp seemingly empty. But the humans hadn't fled. They'd synchronized into perfect stillness. Their consciousness field created a kind of invisibility, a perceptual blind spot in the Varath's sensory apparatus. The aliens couldn't detect the 10,000 humans hidden in the shadows, in bunkers, in plain sight, yet completely unnoticed. It was as though they'd become ghosts. The Verith, confused and alarmed, investigated. They'd never encountered a problem they couldn't solve with superior technology. But technology was useless against human consciousness. When guards entered buildings, they found themselves disoriented, their neural systems overwhelmed by the presence of thousands of synchronized human minds in close proximity. Their weapons malfunctioned. Their communication systems failed. One by one, isolated Verith soldiers found themselves surrounded by humans who moved with eerie coordination, who anticipated every action, who fought with the precision of a single organism with 10,000 limbs. No humans died in that confrontation. Remarkably, the Verith soldiers, exposed to the full intensity of unified human consciousness for the first time, didn't die either. They were simply contained, isolated, rendered harmless. News spread through the consciousness network like lightning. Humans could fight back. Humans could win. The Verith command structure entered crisis mode. Their commanders had no experience with resistance movements. They'd conquered civilizations across the galaxy by eliminating individual leaders, by destroying centralized hierarchies. But you cannot kill a consciousness network. You cannot destroy something that has no center, no weak point, no single point of failure. They tried using their neural suppressors more aggressively, pumping stronger signals into the human brainstems. But the unified consciousness proved more resilient than individual minds ever could be. When one person weakened, thousands sustained them. When fear threatened to break the connection, determination flowed in from the network. The collective human will became stronger than any drug, any implant, any external pressure. Sarah stood in the hidden command center, a converted parking garage 2 levels beneath a bombed-out shopping mall, watching data streams that monitored the consciousness network's growth. The visualization was extraordinary. Thousands of points of light, each representing a human, connected by luminous threads that pulsed with energy. The network had grown to encompass nearly 250,000 humans across eastern Australia. "We're ready," Marcus said beside her, his voice carrying the weight of what that statement meant. "Not yet," Sarah replied. "We need broader geographic distribution. We need the camps in Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, to synchronize with us. We need the hidden cells in rural areas to strengthen their connections. And we need to understand what the Verith are planning next." As if in response to her words, a wave of emotion flooded through the network. Alarm, confusion, pain. The Verith had activated something, some kind of pulse that cascaded through their entire occupation infrastructure. It was designed to incapacitate the consciousness network, to shatter human minds with overwhelming neurological force. But something unexpected happened. The unified consciousness didn't break. Instead, it absorbed the attack, distributed it across the network, transformed the destructive energy into something that strengthened rather than weakened the connection. It was like offering your hand to someone and finding yourself pulling them into the water instead of them pulling you under. The Verith weapons had backfired spectacularly, and in that moment, through the consciousness network that now spanned an entire continent, every human understood the same truth simultaneously. They weren't just fighting back anymore. They were winning. The Verith made their final catastrophic mistake on day 184 of the occupation. They attempted what they called the purification, a continental neural pulse designed to simultaneously neutralize every human consciousness on the planet. It was coordinated from their primary command ship, which hovered above the Pacific Ocean east of Sydney. A vessel so enormous it created its own weather systems. From there, they intended to send a pulse powerful enough to lobotomize every human being on Earth, turning them into docile vegetables, empty shells, useful only for the most basic physical labor. But they hadn't accounted for the conscious network's growth, its reach, its fundamental transformation of human neurological potential. By this point, nearly 2 billion humans, nearly a quarter of Earth's population, had synchronized into the network. They existed in constant awareness of each other, individual yet unified, separate yet connected in ways that transcended anything the Varath considered possible. When the pulse came, it didn't find isolated human minds to break. It found an integrated whole that could anticipate, adapt, and respond with the coordination of a single organism. The consciousness network turned the Varath's own weapon back on them, refracted it through billions of human minds, amplified it, and sent it directly back to the source. The Varath command ship's neural systems, the core of their entire occupation apparatus, exploded in cascading feedback. Their technology, so dependent on neurological control signals, became their vulnerability. Every weapon, every restraint, every tool of oppression suddenly turned inward. In Sydney, humans erupted from the camps, not with violence, but with purpose. The consciousness network coordinated their movements with perfect precision. They moved through the city as a living organism, disabling Varath infrastructure, freeing imprisoned populations, moving with such synchronization that the alien forces couldn't mount effective resistance. Sarah ran through the streets of Parramatta with James beside her, surrounded by thousands of other humans moving in perfect coordination. They weren't thinking individual thoughts anymore. Not entirely. Their minds were part of something vast and beautiful and terrifying. She could feel Marcus coordinating tactical movements in Melbourne. She could sense Elena organizing medical aid stations in Sydney's downtown. She could perceive David managing supply lines across 3 states. But she could also still think her own thoughts, feel her own emotions, maintain her own identity. That was the miracle of it. They had become something greater without losing themselves. The Varath made their final stand at their primary base outside Newcastle. 3,000 alien soldiers, entrenched behind energy barriers and advanced weaponry. The humans could have overwhelmed them through sheer numbers. 10 million synchronized consciousnesses pushing forward without regard for casualties. But Sarah had a better idea. Through the consciousness network, she sent a simple message. Stop. Listen. Understand. 10 million human voices spoke as one, not with sound, but with pure consciousness. They didn't attack. They communicated. They showed the Varath what humanity was, what they'd become, what they would always be. They displayed their pain, their love, their capacity for hope, their will to survive, their determination to protect their families and their home. For the first time, the Varath truly understood what they faced. Some of the alien soldiers laid down their weapons. Others attempted one final assault, only to find their technology consumed by the unified human consciousness, their neural control systems no longer functioning. Within hours, the base was secured. Within days, the last Varath resistance on Earth had collapsed. But the most profound moment came when Sarah found herself face to face with a Verith commander in the ruins of their command center. The alien, its crystalline form cracked and dim, looked at her with something that might have been understanding. "What are you?" it asked, not with hostility, but genuine incomprehension. "Human," Sarah replied simply. "We're what happens when we stop being alone." The Verith commander deactivated itself, a final surrender. Around the globe, the remaining aliens either laid down weapons or activated self-termination protocols. They couldn't comprehend what humanity had become. They couldn't fight an enemy that was united at the most fundamental level, consciousness itself. 6 months after the final Verith forces withdrew from Earth, the world had transformed in ways both extraordinary and terrifyingly new. The consciousness network remained active. Over 3 billion humans still maintained synchronization, though with varying degrees of intensity. Some participated fully, merging their minds into the collective. Others maintained minimal connection, using the network primarily for communication and coordination. And some, a smaller minority, chose to disconnect entirely, preferring the isolation of individual consciousness. There was no judgment. The network had taught humanity that unity didn't require uniformity. Sarah stood in what had once been Parramatta Town Hall, now serving as the first council of unified consciousness. Representatives from every continent, every culture, every remaining human settlement attended. The hall was packed with delegates, scientists, philosophers, and ordinary people who discovered extraordinary abilities within themselves. "The question before us isn't whether we maintain the network," she said, addressing the assembly. "The question is how we use it responsibly. What kind of world do we want to build?" The responses flowed through both the consciousness network and the traditional verbal discussion. Some advocated for a truly unified human society, all consciousness merged into a single distributed entity. Others argued for the network to be purely optional, a tool rather than a default state. Most supported what had become known as conscious pluralism, maintaining the connection available to all while respecting individual autonomy. James, now 17 and sitting on the youth council of the network, spoke up. "We learned something incredible while we were being oppressed. We learned that we're stronger together. But I think we also learned that our strength comes from diversity. Different perspectives, different ideas, different ways of being human. If we forced everyone into the network, we'd lose that." Sarah watched her son speak with pride. In many ways, he represented humanity's future better than she did. He'd grown up in the unified consciousness, knew it as a natural state, but understood the importance of individual choice. The council voted. The decision was clear. The consciousness network would remain active and accessible to all, but completely voluntary. Those who wished to disconnect permanently could do so, with full support and no stigma. Those who wished to maintain the connection at minimal levels could do so, and those who wished to fully merge their consciousness into the collective could do that as well. In the days that followed, something beautiful happened. Rather than creating division, the choice of voluntary participation actually strengthened the network. People stayed connected because they chose to, because they understood its value, because they believed in the possibility of unified humanity. Those who left were supported and reintegrated into traditional human society, and several of them eventually chose to reconnect. The real transformation came as humanity began using the consciousness network not as a weapon, but as a tool for growth. Medical networks formed, where doctors could share knowledge instantly, saving lives with collective expertise. Scientific networks allowed researchers across the planet to work as one mind, accelerating discovery in ways that would have taken centuries in the pre-network world. Educational networks enabled children to learn from the accumulated wisdom of millions. But perhaps most importantly, the consciousness network became a tool for empathy. When humans could literally feel each other's pain, fear, joy, and hope, cruelty became nearly impossible. Prejudice couldn't survive the direct experience of another person's perspective, their suffering, their dreams. Conflict resolution happened at the neural level, misunderstandings dissolving the moment minds truly understood each other. 6 months became a year. The year brought harvests and rebuilding. Civilization, wounded and transformed, learned to walk again. The technology the Verith had used to enslave humanity, the neural implants, the consciousness-responsive devices, was being repurposed for healing and connection rather than control. Sarah stood in her home in Parramatta, looking out over the city that had been her whole world. Her neighborhood had been largely rebuilt. Trees were growing in places where buildings had collapsed. Children played in streets that had once been soaked in blood and tears. James entered, bringing her tea. "The network's asking for your input on the Pacific Reconstruction Initiative," he said. "They want to start rebuilding the ocean ecosystems that were damaged during the occupation." Sarah smiled. The consciousness network had given humanity so much, not just survival, but purpose, direction, meaning. And it had taught them the most important lesson of all, that true strength came from unity, that consciousness was humanity's greatest gift, that when people truly understood each other, they could accomplish the impossible. "Tell them I'm in," she said. "Tell them we all are." As she spoke, she felt the network around her, billions of minds, individual and unified, connected in ways that ancient humans could never have imagined. They weren't perfect. Conflicts still arose. People still disagreed. But they faced those disagreements not as isolated individuals, but as part of something greater than themselves. The Verith had come to conquer Earth, and found instead that they'd awakened something in humanity that had always been there, waiting to emerge. The capacity for connection, the power of collective consciousness, the unbreakable human spirit. Earth had survived the invasion, but more than that, humanity had evolved. And as Sarah Mitchell, neuroscientist and accidental revolutionary, looked toward the future, she understood that this was just the beginning. The hidden strength had been revealed, and it would change everything.